back. Cynthia Bamalu joins us now, Director of Program, Yaga Africa. Good morning. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Good morning.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see any ballot paper not count. After doing what you can, they have to be sure that the votes can and will, should count.
Yes, yes.
So, yes, take us through, because, I mean, on the heat of the day, the election day dynamic, your chances are that, after all, if you look at the figure, the number of votes that were voided, it is huge.
Yeah.
People could win elections if you put that together with those. Why do these things happen in the first place? Any idea?
Yeah, I think first is the lack of voter education, especially voter education around election day process and how to vote. And because we have this system of thumbprinting with an ink, there's a likelihood that if you're not properly educated on how to properly thumbprint, that the ballot paper wouldn't count, or your ballot wouldn't count. And like you mentioned, in the presidential elections, we have over about 938,279 invalid votes, so rejected ballot. That's close to 1 million. So you can imagine that that is a huge number, plus the low turnout. You could imagine that if you add that to a candidate's votes, that is also really huge. Substantial. And for the governorship elections, where we have elections happening at state level, if you have more invalid votes, it could also affect the outcome of an election, which is why it's important voters understand the need to thumbprint properly. They need to ensure you have the right ballot paper ahead of and before you go and drop the ballot paper in the ballot box.
Indeed, we cannot emphasize that. It always sounds like, it's repetition. But, having been a first-time voter myself, I understood why it's extremely important for this sort of education to happen. I mean, things as simple as ink pads. In my polling unit, it wasn't working. I mean, citizens were reporting the fact that they had to go and help bring ink pads, to help, so that they could thumbprint in their elections. But I was looking at the feasibility of folding my paper like this. In two. But it was quite long. I know it's not as long as what we had in 2019 or 2015, where we had 78 political parties. But even then, with 18 political parties, it still seemed a bit difficult to fold the ballot paper like this. I mean, this is not diagonal now. I'm trying to find
inward vertical is what is described as.
Inward vertical. So please to be informed. It's still a bit difficult. Are there any alternatives in terms of how to fold a ballot paper?
Well, for these elections, because we still thumbprint, this is the only way of holding the ballot paper. And the idea is, if you fold inward vertical, if the ink spills, it will spill still within the same column where you have your preferred party. However, if you fold the other way, it becomes a challenge.
Inward horizontal, it will be on another...
So this would be inward. This person obviously folded inward horizontal. And this is one reason a ballot paper would be rejected, where the choice of the voter is not clear. Because now we can't tell, are you voting for the party on top or the second party? Because it's on both, on the column for both parties. And once this is the case, the ballot paper would be rejected. Same also for those who forget to thumbprint. We have instances where people forget to thumbprint.
What?
Yeah.
They didn't forget, or maybe they don't have a choice amongst the people.
Some people
only went to vote for presidential elections. And I don't want to vote for
the others. That is also possible.
Yeah.
But we also realize that sometimes voters, it's, how would I put it? It's tension getting to the voting cubicle. And then you were supposed to, and then you just went in, quickly moved, and then dropped the ballot, and like, I just dropped the ballot.
And you didn't vote.
And you don't have the opportunity to retrieve, right? There's a difference. There's an instance where you make a mistake and you can go back and request for a ballot paper, for instance. So that is when a ballot is spoiled. So that ballot will not make it into the box. Once you have put it in a ballot box, you wouldn't be issued any ballot paper anymore. So that's when the choice is not clear. So
that point is very important, because while I was at the polling unit, more people are able to identify you, you're in trouble. Someone was saying, someone was trying to say, please, ma, do you think my ballots will still count?
What?
Because I think I've made a mistake. And I said, you know what, speak with the polling officer. I cannot advise you, I don't know. So
voters actually have a right to... Because there's an expectation that voters, before you get to the voting cubicle, you could make a mistake. Some people could thumbprint or mistakenly tear the sheet and all. Now, a voter can actually go back to the presiding officer and say, I made a mistake. With this, can I get another ballot paper? What is important is that that ballot paper is kept aside, and then another one is issued. So that ballot paper doesn't make it into the ballot box. So those are usually ballot papers you call spoilt ballots. Spoilt ballots do not make it into the ballot box. However, at the close of polls, they are counted also because you need to account for that. And that gives us a total number of used ballot papers.
But what would you advise? Because remember, when people go about threatening people not to do certain things or vote in a certain way, and if it turns out that one ballot is a mistake on the ballot paper, and then you go drop it or seek in another one, if you had already thumbprinted in a particular way, chances are that somebody might see that, and who knows. So if the person is thinking they're supposed to destroy it and not let somebody see it, will that happen?
It should be to spoil it even further. So maybe
so they don't.
So maybe you
that thought will not come to it won't come to somebody immediately.
Spoil it even further. In a good process where people are properly queued, no one is with you where you are going to do your voting or cast your vote. People ordinarily are not meant to even see how it. Once you move from the polling officials to the voting cubicle, only the polling official can just cite you, because ordinarily it's open secret ballot. However, the challenge is you have polling units that are overcrowded, which is why some people may even just feel, okay, I've made a mistake, I'll just proceed with that. But what is important is that voters realize that there are still instances, just so that if you don't go put in an invalid ballot inside a ballot box, you can approach the PRIO and explain I made a mistake. But they have to retrieve that, keep that, because they would be counting that at the end of the polls. The other point is where a ballot paper is not signed, stamped or dated. This is called endorsed ballot paper. Now, for every ballot paper you're issued, you need to ensure that the presiding officer signs, stamps, and dates the ballot paper. It's done behind the ballot paper.
I was very grateful for that education, because I remember looking at my ballot paper and looking for it to be stamped, signed, and dated. Whoa. So yeah, this little thing.
So if you rush off.
Yes, it would be invalid, because at the counting of polls, only the ballot papers that are properly endorsed, that's those that were signed, stamped, and dated, that would be counted. Because, you know, when they count polls, they first remove rejected ballots, and then they count the valid ones.
So maybe you should try voting tomorrow.
They should take that at the back. Because if people don't look at the back and just look, if this is it, I just thumb, and not knowing that you have to look to the back.
Yeah, so that's once they issue you the ballot paper, ensure it is properly signed, stamped, and dated. It can be on the front now. That's where the voting will be happening.
Because people rush them, so
yes.
If you just look at the front only, so now you need to remember, just be calm. You need to be calm on the election day, or else after waking up by 5 a.m., if that's when you got up and you get there, you don't do just simple things as looking to the back.
It could take you out. The other point is where where a voter in thumbprinting makes a sign, or okay, we've talked about this, where there is no sign on the ballot paper.
Yes.
You forget to thumbprint. We've seen this happen on election day. We're not sure why, but we're just thinking either tension or what have you. There's also a likelihood that we have persons with disability who do not have the fingers, especially persons with any of these that affect your fingerprints. Now, I remember one of the training was for those individuals. They can actually thumbprint with, what do I call it? With their toes. Now, will I call it thumbprint? No. Yeah, you could do
toe print.
Toe print, yeah, with your toes. So there's an expectation that there are individuals who may not have the fingers to do so.
That has to be carefully done.
Yes, it has to be carefully done.
Are there special boxes for them? Because, you know, the toes are a little bigger than the fingers.
Not really. At this moment, not really. However, what is important is that when it comes to that, you don't need to have all you need is just to have the ink, a portion of the ink on the toe or placed at the right column, and you put it just in the middle. So you don't need the whole surface of your toe to be used. The other thing is there's no requirement for any fingers to be used for thumbprint. So it must, while it says thumbprint, you could use your index finger, your middle fingers, or your last, the pinky finger. So what is important is that you have that ink marked on the ballot paper.
I have somebody who wants his vote to count, so maybe he just has a question for me. So.
Thank you, Chamberlain. Well, for my vote to count, INEC has to get there on time. And I know it's one of those issues that Yaga Africa had been concerned about. So, madam, how concerned are you about the logistics that were deployed in the previous election, especially seeing that this is perhaps going to be a little more competitive than the last one?
Well, I am concerned because, you know, the presidential elections recorded late commencement of polls across the country. Some regions opened later than others. And we saw how voting went into the night for some locations. And for these elections, we're hoping that there's more commitment to early commencement of polls. So for instance, as at yesterday morning, we had gotten reports from 26 states, that's 26 of the 36 states where elections will be happening, that materials had moved from the state capital, CBN, to the local government areas. And from today, materials will be deployed from the local government areas to the racks, the registration area centers, ahead of Saturday morning deployment to the polling units. Now, all things being equal, because we're still observing, we currently have our observers at the local government areas to confirm that the materials are the local government areas and that they are moving from local government to the racks. The idea is if you deal with those early movement to the racks, it means materials and personnel will be closer to the polling on elections day. Now, that's one part. The other part is around the contracts with the transport unions and the transporters. One thing we observed in the presidential elections was some transporters refused to move on elections day because they had not been properly paid. And most of them said until they are paid, they would not move. One of the things we had called on INEC from our press statement yesterday as Yaga Africa was to remind INEC, or rather call on INEC, that every contractual agreement with transporters should be strictly adhered to. So payments made ahead of time, at least by the eve of, by tonight and tomorrow morning, every payment should be made, just so that transporters have no excuse than to move. The other thing is also that they engage adequate vehicles for movement. We got reports where you had vehicles carrying multiple polling units and trying to locate those polling units. So it's also important that those things are addressed ahead of the elections on Saturday. So the right numbers for deployment should be strictly properly managed to ensure we have early commencement of polls. Because if polls begin late, then we mean we vote into the night, and that is in itself is a challenge, especially for a contentious and competitive election like that would have on Saturday.
Okay, I think we're going to take one more slide. Maybe let's go to how to locate the polling units.
Oh, yes. But I think the last part is writing and marking. I think it's important. Some voters write their names on ballot papers. Remember, it's secret ballots. You shouldn't write your name. You shouldn't mark anything. Just thumbprint and go. The other is how to locate your polling units. Locating your polling unit is important because we know not every voter turned out on Saturday, 25th. So those who have not voted before, please, you go on the website, cvr.inecnigeria.org/VVS. Put in your name and your date of birth. You'd get your information. Use today to locate that polling unit because that is important to find out. You can also go on voters.inecnigeria.org. For those who did not vote on Saturday, President, 25th February, please, you can still vote this time. It doesn't make sense that turnout was about 27%. Some states had less than 20% voter turnout for the presidential elections. And for these elections, honestly, the only way to change outcome is to increase turnout.
All right, that's Cynthia Bamalu, Director, Program Yaga Africa. Thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.